It's like everywhere you look, someone's always fired up about something online.
Yeah, it feels like you can't even check the news anymore without
Someone, right, someone losing it over something.
Right, exactly.
But, is it really just about the issues themselves, or is there...
I think that's a great question.
Is there something else?
Yeah.
Is there something deeper going on?
Welcome to The Deep Dive, an intense exploration of how you show up in life, business, and relationships, and how they're all connected in the infinite thread that is you. So let's get into the dive. Here's your hosts, Marcus and Nara.
Welcome, Deep Divers. I'm Marcus Harrison.
And I'm Nara Daniels.
Let's get started. All right, so let's dive into outrage culture. That's what we're going to be unpacking today with some insights from Coach Dan Gordon, who is all about understanding our emotions and personal growth.
He's really interesting.
Yeah, so he's got some really thought-provoking ideas about why outrage has become so, outrageous.
Well, and I think one of the most fascinating things about Coach Cordy's work is that he doesn't shy away from kind of the uncomfortable truth, which is that outrage actually sometimes feels good.
Yes. Wait, really, I've definitely felt that, like that rush of I'm right and you're wrong, especially online.
Right.
But I always thought it was coming from a place of genuine concern. Is he saying that might not be the whole story?
Well, yeah. I mean, he is suggesting that there's a really powerful psychological pull to outrage.
Correct.
And, when you think about it, when you're outraged, there's this sense of certainty of knowing you're on the right side.
Right, yeah.
And that certainty makes us feel safe, like we have a handle on things.
Okay.
Which in turn dials down our anxiety.
So it's not just about the issue itself, it's about how that outrage makes us feel.
Exactly, yeah. And Coach Gordon points out that this need for certainty, it's deeply rooted in our biology, you know?
Okay.
Our brains are literally wired to seek out safety and avoid threats.
So it's like a survival instinct almost.
Yeah, I think you could definitely say that.
Makes sense.
So in a world that often feels really chaotic and unpredictable, outrage, with its clear sense of right and wrong, can feel like a life raft,
Right.
It's giving us that illusion of control when things just feel out of control.
So it's like our brain's way of hitting the emergency brake when things feel like they're spinning out of control.
Exactly.
But if it feels so good, why is that a problem?
Well, because that good feeling, it can be deceptive, right?
Okay.
And Coach Gordon argues that this drive for certainty through outrage, it can actually blind us to other perspectives.
Oh, interesting.
And it just shuts down any kind of productive dialogue. We become so focused on being right that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like we're so busy building walls and pointing fingers that we just miss opportunities to connect or understand each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if outrage is often more about our own need for safety than the issue at hand,
right,
what does that mean for how we navigate these charged situations?
That's where Coach Gordon's insights get really practical, I think.
Okay.
He suggests that instead of getting swept up in the outrage ourselves, we can start by just acknowledging that, fear and that need for certainty are at play. And by recognizing those feelings within ourselves, we can start to kind of disentangle them from the issue itself.
So the first step is to kind of press pause on that knee-jerk reaction
right.
and just get curious about what's really driving our outrage.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that pause, that moment of self-awareness, I think that can make all the difference in how we choose to respond.
This is already making me rethink how I approach these kinds of situations.
Yeah.
So if outrage is often a reaction to fear, what are some of the specific fears that might be fueling this whole outrage culture thing?
That's a great question. And it's definitely something that Coach Gordon explores in depth.
Okay.
He argues that one of the biggest fears driving outrage is the fear of being ostracized,
okay,
of being on the wrong side and, facing social consequences for that.
Oh, wow. That fear of being canceled or judged by our peers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And in a world where social belonging is just so important, that fear can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It can drive us to take really extreme positions or say things we don't even fully believe.
Right.
Just to avoid, being on the outs.
Totally. It makes a lot of sense. It's almost like a survival instinct, trying to stay with the pack, even if it means sacrificing some of our own individuality.
Right. And Coach Gordon argues that this fear, it can be especially potent online,
Oh, for sure.
where the lines between our personal and social lives are increasingly blurred.
Yeah, it feels like the stakes are higher online, like everything we say or do is under a microscope.
And that's kind of where the whole concept of virtue signaling comes into play.
Okay.
It's this idea that we express outrage, not necessarily because we deeply care about the issue, but because we want to signal our allegiance to a particular group or ideology.
Oh, so it's less about like genuine conviction and more about social currency.
Exactly.
Like, look at me, I'm a good person.
Yeah, and Coach Gordon actually has a rather striking analogy to illustrate this point. He compares it to anti-gun activists shooting pro-gun people.
What?
The irony, he says, is pretty blatant, you know? The method contradicts the message entirely.
Wow, that's a powerful image. It really highlights that disconnect between like the outrage and the actual values or actions, you know.
Right.
But if we're often driven by, fear and the need to fit in, how do we break free from that cycle?
Yeah.
Like, how do we find the courage to stand up for what we believe in without getting swept up in all the outrage?
That's where Coach Gordon's advice gets really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
He suggests that the antidote to outrage culture, it all starts with ourselves.
Okay.
He says, and I'm quoting here, "Charity begins at home. So does the charity of one's own sense of safety."
So he's saying that instead of like trying to control other people's outrage, we need to like focus on managing our own reactions.
Precisely.
Yeah.
He talks about the importance of easing our own outrage.
Okay.
And it's about recognizing that those we disagree with, even, vehemently disagree with, they're still human beings.
Right.
With their own hopes, fears, and experiences.
Okay, but how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
Like, how do we ease our own outrage in a world that often feels like it's designed to provoke it?
Right.
It's tough.
Yeah, well, Coach Gordon emphasizes the importance of cultivating like inner security. It's about finding that sense of safety and stability within ourselves. So we're not constantly seeking it externally through like validation or control.
So it's about building that resilience to like withstand the pressure to conform or react in a certain way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he talks about, practicing mindfulness, recognizing our triggers,
Yeah.
and just developing healthy coping mechanisms for dealing with difficult emotions.
Okay.
It's about learning to sit with discomfort without needing to like lash out or seek external validation.
That sounds incredibly challenging, especially in like today's world. But I can see how like developing that inner strength and resilience would be like crucial for navigating these charged situations without getting pulled into the outrage vortex.
Absolutely.
Right.
And Coach Gordon suggests that by cultivating this inner peace and security,
Okay.
we can actually become more effective agents of change.
Okay.
We can engage in difficult conversations with more empathy and understanding, even when we disagree, fundamentally.
So it's not about suppressing our emotions or ignoring like injustice.
Right.
It's about finding a more grounded and compassionate way to respond.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. It's about shifting from a place of reactivity to a place of intentionality.
Okay.
And that shift, he argues, can have a ripple effect, inspiring others to do the same.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's about leading by example, like showing that it is possible to stand up for what you believe in without getting caught in that outrage trap. But it's one thing to talk about, easing our own outrage. Like, how do we actually put that into practice?
Yeah.
What are some like tangible steps we can take?
Coach Gordon offers some really practical advice here.
Okay.
He suggests that we start by recognizing our triggers.
Okay.
What are the topics, situations, or even specific people
Right.
that tend to just push our buttons and send us down that outrage spiral?
Yeah.
And once we know our triggers, we can start to develop strategies for managing our reactions.
Also, it's like having a game plan for those moments when we feel that familiar surge of anger or indignation.
Exactly. Yeah. And he suggests simple but powerful techniques.
Okay.
Like taking a few deep breaths.
Right.
Removing ourselves from the situation or even just delaying our response.
Okay.
Giving ourselves that space to cool down can prevent us from saying or doing something we later regret.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
It's like hitting the pause button before we hit the send button.
Right.
It gives us a chance to like reflect and respond more thoughtfully.
Exactly.
But what about those times when we're like confronted with something truly egregious, you know?
Right.
Like how do we balance that need for action
Yeah.
with the need to avoid feeding the outrage machine?
That's where discernment comes in.
Okay.
Coach Gordon encourages us to ask ourselves, is this something I truly care about?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I just reacting to the hype?
Right.
You know? And he suggests considering the potential consequences of our actions.
Okay.
Like, is our outrage likely to lead to positive change?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it just going to create more division and negativity?
So it's about choosing our battles wisely and focusing our energy where it can like make a real difference.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And he reminds us that sometimes the most powerful form of activism is simply choosing to opt out of the outrage cycle altogether.
Interesting.
You know, instead of getting swept up in the drama,
Right.
we can focus on building positive connections.
Supporting causes we believe in and just living our values in our everyday lives.
That's such a powerful reminder.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the negativity,
Yeah.
but ultimately it's about focusing on what we can control
Right.
and making a positive impact in our own way.
Mm-hmm.
So if easing our own outrage
Yeah.
is like the first step,
Right.
what comes next? Like,
Yeah.
how do we start to shift the culture as a whole?
Coach Gordon believes that real change, it starts with individual transformation.
Okay.
And he suggests that as we cultivate more inner peace and resilience, it'll naturally kind of radiate outward,
Okay.
influencing those around us.
So it's about becoming the change we want to see in the world.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And he encourages us to lead by example, showing that it is possible to engage in difficult conversations with respect and understanding,
Yeah.
even when we hold, opposing views.
That sounds like a tall order, especially in today's like polarized climate.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy.
But I can see how embodying those qualities of like empathy and compassion could be incredibly powerful.
Absolutely.
Right.
And he emphasizes the importance of seeking out diverse perspectives,
Okay.
engaging with people who challenge our assumptions, and being willing to listen with an open mind.
So instead of like retreating into our echo chambers,
Right.
it's about expanding our horizons and like engaging with the world in a more nuanced and compassionate way.
Exactly, yeah.
Got it.
And that's where real growth and transformation can happen.
You know, this whole conversation has really shifted my perspective on this.
Yeah.
I used to think outrage was about like caring, about fighting for what's right.
Right?
But now I'm seeing how it can be this like sneaky trap fueled by fear and this like need to fit in.
And that's huge.
Yeah.
Like once you start to see that pattern, it changes how you approach everything.
Right.
Coach Gordon would say that this is like the beginning of real emotional intelligence.
Yep.
Not just reacting, but understanding the why behind our reactions.
So if we're not supposed to just like yell into the void,
Right.
what are we supposed to do when we see things happening that we disagree with?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there a way to be like engaged without getting sucked into that outrage vortex?
There absolutely is. Coach Gordon has a whole section on this, and it's actually pretty hopeful.
Okay.
He reminds us that the world is full of uncertainty and danger. That's a fact.
Right.
But we don't have to fuel the fire with like catastrophic thinking.
Okay.
It's not about ignoring the problems, but finding a more grounded approach to dealing with them.
So instead of like freaking out and assuming the worst,
Right.
maybe we take a step back and try to like understand the situation more clearly.
Yeah.
It's like kind of what he means by easing our own outrage.
Exactly. And he gives some great examples.
So-
Like, let's say you see a news story that makes you furious.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of immediately jumping on social media to rant, what if you try to find out more information?
Okay.
Maybe there's context missing from the headline.
Right.
Maybe there are different viewpoints that haven't been considered.
That's actually a really good point. I know I've definitely fallen into that trap of reacting to headlines without like digging deeper.
Right.
It's like we're so quick to judge and condemn without really understanding the whole picture.
And Coach Gordon reminds us that even those we vehemently disagree with, they're still human beings.
Right.
They have hearts, loved ones, hopes, and dreams, just like we do.
Yeah.
So can we find a way to see that humanity even in the midst of disagreement?
That's tough, but I see what you mean.
Yeah,
It's like choosing to see the person behind the viewpoint rather than just the viewpoint itself.
exactly. And that's where real change can happen.
Okay.
Because when we start to see each other as human beings, it becomes a lot harder to dehumanize and demonize each other.
Right.
It opens up the possibility for dialogue, for understanding, and maybe even for finding common ground.
Yeah, I love that. This whole deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening.
Good.
It's made me realize that I've been playing the outrage game more than I realized.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, it's not a game I want to play anymore.
That's the first step to breaking free, that awareness.
Okay.
And from there, you can start to choose a different path, a path of conscious action and compassionate engagement.
So to wrap things up,
Yeah.
what would be your biggest takeaway from Coach Dan Gordy's work on outrage culture? Like, what's that one thing you want our listener to walk away with today?
If I had to pick one thing, it would be this. You can't control other people's outrage, but you can control your own reaction.
Okay.
And by choosing to ease your own outrage, you're not just making a personal choice, you're contributing to a shift in the collective consciousness. You're showing the world that there's a different way.
That's a really powerful thought to leave us with.
Yeah.
So for our listener out there, the next time you feel that surge of outrage, take a moment.
Agreed.
Remember what we've talked about today.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, is this serving me? Is this contributing to a better world? And maybe, just maybe, you'll choose a different path. A path of compassion, understanding, and real connection.
We hope you enjoyed the deep dive. Subscribe to the podcast for more deep dives as Nara and Marcus traverse the infinite exploration into the mind and soul of you. We'll see you next time on The Dive.